Cultural hybridity as evidenced by style, an examination of pre-Columbian ceramics from West Mexico and Ecuador by Sidney Borofsky. Clear evidence of shared technology with pre-Columbian Ecuador, such as the use of shaft tombs in metallurgy, has been used to distinguish West Mexico from the rest of Mesoamerica. Maritime travel from Ecuador to West Mexico is the likely reason for the transmission of several shared technologies. Maritime archaeologist Richard Callahan establishes the plausible use of balsa wood rafts. Two possible ports of entry in West Mexico noted by Callahan are Nayarit and Colima, neighboring the state of Jalisco. Doohan and Hostler explore the use of balsa wood rafts, which were designed to carry a crew of up to 20 people, along with goods and rations. Maritime travel allows for the transmission of technology between these two pre-Columbian areas. Some of the earliest and most well-documented evidence of shared technology with Ecuador comes from metallurgy and shaft tomb structures. This technology allows us to consider aesthetic impact as a result of seafaring. Something interesting to note is that the image on the bottom right is a replica of the shaft tombs exhibited at the Museo Nacional de Antropología y Historia. In this paper, I will examine aesthetic impact through the formal stylistic qualities of ceramics. Primarily, this analysis will focus on where stylistic traditions of the Chorrera and Hamacoque of Ecuador meet with the cultures from Nayarit, Jalisco, and Colima in West Mexico. Using a data set of ceramic objects, I will chart the formal qualities of each sample to illuminate where style converges and diverges. The images shown here are some examples of objects in my sample set. Scholars like Isabel Kelly have laid the groundwork for categorizing specific stylizations of objects throughout different parts of West Mexico, from Oaxaca to Nayarit. Her chronological studies inferred external relationships to these objects related to trade occurring within the contiguous land of Mesoamerica. Here you will see a chronological chart of ancient West Mexico. The dates on this chart range from 1500 BC all the way to 700 AD. The ceramics most pertinent to my study come from the late formative period. The cultures that I will be discussing are mainly the Tlalotonala, Ameca Aztlan, the Isla del Rio style, and the Comala cultures. The ceramics of West Mexico are comprised of figurines and vessels largely found in funerary settings like the shaft tomb. They're often hand-built from red clay, featuring red, orange, or brown slip. The surface of these objects are burnished, decorated with slip painting and incised lined work. Common motifs associated with West Mexican figurines and vessels are humans, animals, and local vegetation. Something interesting to note would be the terracotta dog on the upper left-hand corner of the screen. These dogs are a very common motif found throughout the Colima cultures. Previous research to stylistically categorize and chronicle the complex ceramics of West Mexico has been done by Richard Townsend. Some cultural phases included in my sample set are the Isla del Rio, Comala, Ameca Aztlan, and Tlalotonala. Each of these early cultures bear distinctive features. Townsend discusses common motifs found on ceramics from Isla del Rio related to the ritual aspects of daily life, including housing, ritual practice, and textile patterns. Patricia Annawalt uses the latter to begin to weave the connection between West Mexico and Ecuador. Using formal analysis techniques, I will assess traits which represent the aesthetic impact and cultural hybridity resulting from coastal contact with Ecuador. This is to account for how maritime research in this area changed how we attribute aesthetic traits in West Mexico. During my research, I have noticed a significant amount of long-standing connection between Ecuador and various points of West Mexico, being Nayarit, Colima, and Jalisco. This paper asserts that this cross-cultural connection is not one-to-one. Rather, this connection is long-standing and much deeper than originally purported by earlier scholarship. Elements of style from both the chorrera and jamacoque permeate the aesthetics of West Mexico. To streamline the intricacies of formal analysis, I have selected 7 characteristics to account for key similarities and differences in aesthetic choices. The categories to be discussed are flatter form, inflated form, defined nose, nose jewelry, geometric lines, costuming, and coffee bean eyes. Beginning with Nayarit, 4 figurines from this region exhibit flatter forms, defined nose shapes accompanied by nose ring jewelry, patterns that are geometric, rendered with both resist and incising techniques, and allusions to textile clothing. A long-standing relationship between early cultures of Ecuador and West Mexico would surely indicate a hybridization of aesthetics. Let us compare style traits between the standing figure of a woman from the chorrera culture on the right and the kneeling female figure from the Laguillas region of Nayarit on the left. The standing figure of a woman is built from lighter colored clay. It has clear patterned attire with a darker helmet, drawing attention to its facial features. This burnished figurine has dark paint around the eyes, an indicator of performance garb. While the head of the chorrera figure is rounded, the body exhibits a much less inflated, flatter form. In addition, ear jewelry frames the face. The nose is sharp and defined. An emphasis on painting the face complements the darker pigmented attire. The kneeling female figure from Nayarit has darker coloration around the eyes, much like that of the chorrera. This is supplemented by a darker helmet also framing the facial features. The figurine from Nayarit also has a less inflated form of the characteristic coffee bean eyes found on the chorrera figure. The standing female figurine is dated to around 600 years prior to the kneeling female figure of Nayarit. However, one may find that cultural lag time may be responsible for slower transmission of aesthetic features. The similarities in traits which come up over time allude to the stylistic impact on ceramics from Nayarit as a result of coastal contact. Along with Nayarit, Richard Callahan uses digital simulations of maritime travel to pinpoint Jalisco as a point of contact with Ecuadorian traders. I will be comparing figurines from Jalisco with those from the jamacoque to draw attention to aesthetic impact as a result of this contact. Something to note that is interesting is that the seated ball player on the right exhibits a narrative of the iconic ball game found throughout Mesoamerica. Let us compare 2 late formative ceramic figurines from these cultures. The kneeling female from the Jalisco culture has round, softer features which are less inflated throughout the body, with the exception of upturned shoulders. This would be the figure on the left. The difference in flatness from the shoulders to the body is also found on the standing woman figurine from the Hamakoke culture on the right. This figurine is unlike the previous example from Jalisco, in which there is heavy jewelry worn on the chest and ears. Both figurines show attention to adornment in the form of headwear featuring beaded attachments, attire in the form of skirts, with nothing worn on the chest. Additional adornment includes traces of polychrome pigment, characteristics such as opened eyes, defined nose, inflated forms, and flatter extremities show the kindred nature of these figurines. The similar qualities allow us to consider aesthetic impact as a result of seafaring. Of course, cultures will localize traditions to fit the needs of their specific people. However, cultural connections show through the ceramic objects passed down over time. Long-standing contact with Ecuador impacts the aesthetics of Colima as well. The ceramics of pre-Columbian Colima bear many localized qualities which distinguish this area. Some of the most iconic among these include burnished ceramics and red clay. While we see many characteristics of localized style and motif, there are also style attributes which are shared with the ceramic figurines of the Hamakoke. Comparing the same standing woman figurine from the Hamakoke on the right with the figurine of the standard bearer from the Comala culture on the left, I will show how the impact of coastal contact permeates the local aesthetic traditions. The standard bearer is a burnished redware with a less inflated, rounder form. Much of the design is incised, including the clothing and the turban or helmet. The eyes of this figurine are open and almond-shaped, followed by a well-defined nose. The fingers and toes of this figurine are also incised and unseparated from the larger body of clay. The standing woman figurine also uses almond-shaped eyes. Headwear is incised in both figurines, although the hat of the standing woman appears to be hand-sculpted as well. The bodies of both figurines are rendered with a rounder silhouette and a less inflated overall form. Both ceramics use a defined nose to frame the facial features. Clearly, there are some localized characteristics which differentiate the two figurines. However, we see yet again the long-standing impact of coastal connection through overarching style characteristics. An example in which vessels adapt some style traits from pre-Columbian Ecuadorian cultures is the squash vessel with parrots found at the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. This vessel, and many vessels from the Comala phase, show similarities in form and aesthetics as spouted vessels from the Chorera culture. An example from the Chorera culture is shown on the right, while the Comala squash vessel is shown on the left. A spouted vessel from the Chorera culture, located at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, will be used as a comparator. This object exhibits massive inflation of a squash-like form. The burnished exterior gives a bright sheen to the Chorera vessel. The squash shape is split by nodes, alluding to the vegetation that inspired the object. The Comala squash vessel, however, features an adaptation of fluting in the form of angular nodes. Additionally, its placement inside of a funerary structure suggests a connection to both the aesthetics and technology from Ecuador. These ceramics make clear the concept that while these connections may be responsible for certain style traits, the holistic experience of a culture will prevail through the localization of its objects. Aaron Sugar and Scott Simmons have discussed the idea of cultural lag time, or the translation of techniques of making from one culture to another. allowing us to understand the time between contact with an aesthetic and the implementation of it. An example of lag time may be observed through the previous example of spouted vessels from the Chorrera. Vessels such as these from the Chorrera culture set the precedent for burnished gourd vessel forms found in the Comala culture, as they were created much earlier. The spouted vessel contains features which have been adapted by West Mexicans as early as 200 years and as late as 1,500 years after their creation. Of the many adaptations of these vessels found in Colima, one in particular exaggerates the iconic nodule form, would be the gadroon vessels from the Comala phase. Something interesting to note about these vessels, as having seen them in person and felt the weight of them, I can say that they are quite heavy. Aesthetic transmission via cultural connection extends itself, naturally, to hybridity. The implications of coastal contact bring up the theory of hybridity. This concept, cultivated by Dr. Omi Baba, confronts the space in between identity, which occurs when one culture connects with another. A case can be made for the hybridization in the styles and techniques of objects in West Mexico as visual evidence of the impact of coastal connection. However, discussion of theory of hybridity in the Mesoamerican world usually takes place post-colonially. One might argue that this applies to pre-Columbian civilizations on the basis of hybrid culture as a result of trade long before colonization. Thinking on hybridity, the evidence of human connection lies in the merging culture of aesthetics. However, this is just one of many examples across cultural connection in West Mexico and the aesthetic impact which shows for it. I chose to use the example of canines because this may actually allude to an aesthetic connection from West Mexico to Ecuador. Something interesting to note about these vessels in particular is that they are based off of the Xolo Squinkle dog, which can represent, some think, a passage to the afterlife and a guide dog to take you there. In summation, evidence of shared technology and proposed means of travel support the idea and argument that West Mexico exhibits cultural impact as a result of coastal contact with Ecuador. This is noted through a sample set of ceramics which demonstrate the aesthetic impact of this connection. Cross-cultural contact with Ecuador is likely long-standing and not a mere one-to-one connection, meaning this connection likely happened over a long period of time with a deeper complexity. Pre-Columbian West Mexican culture lies in its perseverance as a network of human connection. The ceramics of West Mexico act as a time capsule, never wavering in its illumination of relationships. I would like to thank my mentors, Dr. Jillian Mollenauer, Dr. Summer Trenton, and Professor Hoyer. Your guidance has allowed my research process to reach new heights. I would also like to thank my wife, Nicole, whose support and patience I could not be more grateful for throughout the lengthy research process.